And a happy birthday to anybody that's celebrating a birthday today on July 30th, 2018. Terry Caliendo here from Dedicated Managers again. And I want to talk about now getting the information from my database into Algolia. So how does it get there? Well, first, I could shoot it directly from the interface here on the back end, obviously in code. I could shoot it to both the Firestore, Firebase Firestore database, and then shoot it over to Algolia with another asynchronous call from my program. But instead I've chosen to use, at least I believe I could do that. I haven't actually implemented it, but I would think you could. It's just more JavaScript code. But what I ended up using, and what most people seem to be using out on the web, and that's where most of the tutorials are, is we shoot the data from the application using JavaScript on the back end. We send it to Firebase to store in the Firebase Firestore, and then Firebase has Cloud Functions that allow us to then any operation that happens on a database, like adding a new document or collection or whatever, we can fire it over to really it's document, I think, adding new data. We can fire a function that will then do something, and I happen to be using a function that uses JavaScript code to then send that information that just happened on the database, send whatever change it is over to Algolia to be stored in in an index that I create. And I created this primary kinship caregiver. It's the same as the other one on my Firebase Firestore database. But really, this key could be anything. It's just helping me keep track by keeping it the same thing. So how do I do that? How am I getting it to go from here to the Firebase Firestore? I've talked about that in the past, and that's using Firebase's code, JavaScript code that you can plug into your project, and then from Firebase using the functions system over to Algolia. So let me pull up my Firebase project here, and it's actually quite simple. I haven't gotten around to, because I was just playing with this when I did it, I haven't implemented it in my code. This is my code for the entire project, the database project, and this is what I commit to GitHub. But so I haven't committed this anywhere yet to be found, so I'll just kind of show the functionality as I go through, and if you ever want to use it, you won't have a link just yet, but I'll come back once I do figure out how to commit it in the main repository, the search box, my main repository. Once I get it in there, then I'll put links to, it'll be part of the project. And the reason I haven't put it in yet is because the directory structure is very different. When you install a Firebase function, you go through a whole bunch of command line stuff that loads this this directory structure, and it doesn't coincide with this directory structure in my main code. I would have a in here it would throw a Firebase, or no, what is it? Let's see if I can shrink these two together. And let's see if I can show them at the same time. So here's the two editors, and this is the the new functions code, and this is the old one. So it creates at the directory that you're in, that you do the command line installation, and then Google has a good tutorial on how to get it installed. But so it loads this functions directory, which would be at the same level as all my other directories here. But then inside that functions directory is a node modules directory where it's going to load tons and tons of modules that it uses. And so if I was to put that directly in this code, I have to take the time to use the git ignore to allow the functions directory, but ignore the functions subdirectory of node modules, which By the time I've explained all of this, I could have probably done it, but I just haven't done that yet. And I started because I wasn't sure if I was going to use this when I started, so I haven't fully implemented it into the project. But anyway, when you create this code, you end up loading it up to Firebase's servers, and I doubt yeah, I don't think I've got it in the history here. But you run Firebase build or something. I can't remember what it is. I'll have to look real quick. And then it'll shoot this code up to the Firestore up here in the Firebase Firestore, and it'll become your functions. Now we can't look at the code, but it'll end up being what gets output here. So this is my Firestore onWrite, which is my, whoops, wrong one. That's my code here, Firestore onWrite. So this code gets pushed up to the server and then gets run for every database interaction that I tell it to with code. So let's kind of go through what I had to do. So I took a quick pause there to load up the instructions. So I'm in Firebase here, and I'm in Firebase Functions, Cloud Functions, and I'm on the Get Started tab or menu item. And so here's how you install it into your project. You have to run, so you create a project and you run npm install. You obviously have to have npm installed. Hopefully you can figure out how to do that. Lots of tutorials on how to do that. But you install the Firebase tools globally so that it's a command line utility that you can use. And then you'll run this. That'll give you the Firebase command that you can pass parameters to. And this is a command line utility that you would use, down here. So you would use Firebase whatever, and I'll show that probably in a second to deploy. So you run Firebase Login, which is going to pop open, and this I couldn't figure this out to start. I was kind of blindsided until I closed all my windows, but it pops open a browser window that you need to use to load the login functionality. So it uses tokens and whatnot to log into your Firebase here. So you'll get a pop-up that says, do you want to allow this whatever it is to access your Firebase database, and you just say yes to that. And then you run Firebase init functions. So that'll load your project in, and so you get that structure that I was talking about with the functions directory. And the main one is this is where your code is going to go. So that is this right here. It's going to load that, create that functions directory, get that node modules all loaded up if you say yes, and then set up the rest of your Firebase stuff to work. So if I go back to the code, that's all this stuff here. Pretty simple. I mean, you can go back and read through all this stuff. That's why I'm flying through. It's pretty self-explanatory. Then you load the modules into your app, and so that's what I do up here. I load the modules here, and then they have you. I'm cheating right now. I'm lazy. You're supposed to abstract this stuff so that you don't commit it to your repository, so that it's local, and so that the keys aren't shown. But these are both public key. Well, this is a private key. I'm not supposed to show this. But ultimately, it's not hard for me, once I go to production, to go to Algolia, and you get those API keys in the Algolia interface. So this is the Algolia interface, and I'm trying to load there they are, the API keys. And so these are the keys that you get. In the previous videos, I showed how to do searching functionality. This is my app ID, and then this is the public key that you're supposed to show people. This is the private key that nobody's supposed to see. You can copy it and then paste it into your project. But ultimately, I can click regenerate. Even though I'm showing you my public key right now, or my private key, I can click regenerate and go and put that new code in, and then redeploy, and so it will. It's not really a big deal that I'm showing you my private key. It's like a credit card number. You just say it's been exposed and you go get a new one. As opposed to a social security number, which is ridiculous that you can't get a new one in this day and age. So a little political commentary there, I guess. Anyway, that sets up the, well, that's actually setting up the Algolia search. I'm sorry, I jumped ahead. The Firebase, remember I said that when you do this login, it stores the credentials locally. So you're not going to see any credentials in here because it's part of the project. And I looked forever to see where it stores it, or at least the token, and I haven't found where it stores it. So it must store it somewhere in the registry or something in the Windows environment that I just haven't found yet. But anyway, that's why you're not seeing anything other than this right here. So this calls that config file that gets the login information, I believe, to initialize the app. So sorry, I jumped ahead there with the Algolia stuff. This right here gets me logged into the Firestore locally. Actually, maybe you don't need any credentials, because I'm uploading this to, that's what it is. I'm uploading this to, when I deploy it down here, it uploads to the store, to my functions, and so now it's already a part of this system, so it really doesn't need to log in. At that point, it just needs the config stuff for the Firebase that's part of this project. Anyway, so then I need to load the Algolia stuff, and so I require Algolia Search, and I believe I had to install that locally in my project. It should be part of my node modules here, which will get uploaded when I deploy. Let's see if Algolia is in there. There's Algolia Search right there. So yeah, I installed Algolia Search using Algolia's documentation. Let me try and pull that up real quick. So I took a time out there and found something. I didn't really find the Algolia documentation, but here's something on medium.com, and all I did was search for Algolia Cloud Functions, and there's all kinds of stuff out there to get information on how to get it installed. I'm waiting for this to load. And then, so, if you scroll down a little bit here, a lot of this talks about stuff we've already talked about, installing Firebase tools, and then Firebase init, and we did init functions. It's pretty much the same thing. It's just less interactive. And then down here, you cd into the functions, and then you do install Algolia Search, and then save it as part of the the product, the JSON file. And then this is some other stuff that this thing's talking about that's not part of my project. But anyway, that's really all you have to do to get the Algolia Search installed, is that one line there down here in the command line as part of your project within the functions directory. And so then you configure Algolia. You require Algolia into your project. This is using I couldn't quite figure it out. I think it's the the Cloud Functions is using an older version of Node, and there's tutorials out there, I think, on how to get Webpack involved and all kinds of that stuff, so that you can use more ES6 functionality. There's some ES6 functionality, newer JavaScript functionality available, but you notice I'm using require instead of import. Possibly I can use import. I just followed what was out there, and everything worked. So this is just what I did. So anyway, you require the Algolia Search. You set it to this variable, which then you initialize with your app ID, and then your private key, which allows you to make changes to the database. The public key doesn't allow you to. And again, I shouldn't be showing this, but like I said, I can just regenerate it. So now I've got my Algolia object that allows me to get the information over to Algolia. So I've got my this admin object that's going to let me communicate with the Firestore, and Algolia object that's going to let me communicate with Algolia. So then I just write a function called Firestore onWrite, and I call it that because it listens to anything that happens on the database, any type of write on the database that happens within the primary kinship caregiver collection. So that is, if I load my database back up, that is back in my database. And everything's slow right now because I live out in the boonies and I'm uploading a video right now. So everything takes forever to load. All right, there it is. It came through. And so there, what was I talking about? I've lost my train of thought. I'm trying to show the collection. So here's my primary kinship caregiver. So anything that happens on this collection is going to fire a cloud function. So anything on this collection, and this is a variable, so that says that any type of doc ID, which means any document that happens on the primary kinship caregiver collection, let's do something with it. So anything that writes to it. And so a write can be a delete, an add, or an update. And so I have to check for that within the construct here. And so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create the index for Algolia, or I'm going to get an index back to say, hey, in Algolia, I want to work with the primary kinship caregiver index. Now, again, that's where I talked about in previous videos that in Algolia, so, oops, if I go to my indices, this, I could have called this anything. I would just have to match it up in my in my cloud functions here, as well as my project when I go to retrieve and search for data. So you just have to be consistent with what you're using. I just use the same thing throughout wherever, so it all kind of passes through and it's just easy to copy and paste. But anyway, this line of code just, it tells Algolia, hey, I'm sending information to and from that primary kinship caregiver index. And then so the next thing says if the change, so I get when this document happens, when something is written to this collection, I get a change object because there was a before and after state. If it was new, the before state is empty and the after state is the information. If it's an update, the before is the change before the update, and then the change.after is the change after the update. And since they could also delete the document, I have to check and see if it still exists. And if it is deleted, no, this is if it's still here. So if the after state is that it still exists, the after state would be non-existent if it was deleted. But if it hasn't been deleted, that's what I want to do here. So it still exists, which means it was either a new document created or an update to a document. And so now I'm going to log out that I'm copying it to Algolia, and I ultimately can get rid of this, but that's what we see in the functions here. Let's see if I can open this in a new tab. I didn't want a new window, I want a new tab. Let's see if that loads. So there it is, it loaded. I took a pause there to let it load because again my system's slow right now. And so if I go look in the logs, and I can see there's my copying to Algolia console.log output in my logs. So that's tying this to the the cloud functions. So then I grab the data. That's what this does. This gets the the change.after is the information that was updated. So that after data, I'm throwing that into my new data object. So this contains all my new information. And then I add to it the object ID because Algolia needs this object ID to be part of your insertion into its database with any new information or updates. And so I get the ID from change.after, that the ID is the Firebase ID, which ultimately is, if I go back to my Firestore database, that's this right here. So I'm just going to use this same key to this ID to store it in Algolia, so that my references are really simple. So that's the object ID in Algolia. So that's how Algolia is going to reference keep a unique key for it. If I don't add this parameter, I believe Algolia will just create an ID for you. But again, I wanted things to match up, so I chose to implement the ID. And then all we do is we call on that index, which was the thing we set up to say, hey, I want to send information to the primary kinship caregiver index in Algolia. I want to save my object, and so here's my object that I created back here. I gave it the data and an ID, and now I'm passing it in. And so this is an asynchronous function which will return a promise that I can call a then on. And so after it's done and it's successful, I can console log, hey, it's been successful. Here's the data that I wrote, and here's that success object that I've even documented it here, but the success object tells you the time it was updated, the task ID, and the object ID. So if I hadn't included my own object ID, it would have returned one for me that I could have done something with, I believe. So that is, all that stuff is here. So that's the add to Algolia successful, the new data for Algolia and whatnot. So that's this right here. And then I'm going to output both the objects. So my data object and then my success object. So here is the data object, and it nicely gives it to you as an object. So client 1 times, this is all my information from my database, including that object ID that I set up or added to it so that it could be stored. And again, so if I look at object ID XQD 6, and I go back here and I look for XQD6, so this is my information in Firebase. So you can see I'm tying all the information together to make it easy, and then again when I retrieve it later, I just ask for the object ID, and then I know which document I'm trying to load when I want to display the information, go get the information or load that page, and that gets back to my store where I do this search and I create this link. Look down here, you'll see down here when I hover, what was it, client, there it is, client 1 was XQD, I think. So that's my to, and that's my route, so I can just plug it right into the route and then load that information. Now this actually has died. If I refresh, I'll get my connection back. I lost the connection again because I still haven't figured that out. That's a bug that if I just let the system sit for too long, it overloads and dies out. And I haven't done any functionality to catch that yet and repair it. So anyway, back to where was I? Back to the code probably. So I logged out those objects. Oh yeah, let's look at the success object real quick. And so here's the success object, and that's just that's the format of the success object that I can do anything I want with it. But again, I've already got this information, so I don't need to do anything with it because it didn't create a new one for me. So that's done there, and that's how I add an object or update an object to Algolia from the Cloud function. Now the inverse is, or the other side of it is, if the change.after does not exist, meaning that the document has been deleted, now I need to go into Algolia, and I just simply call on that same index that I created that talks to the primary kinship caregiver index. I just say, hey, go and delete the object with the that ID that came in from the update. So the update was whatever this doc ID was. I don't know if I could use that parameter, but it ends up coming through on the change anyway. It's the same thing on the change.after.id. So that's what I end up using. And so I give that to the delete object, and that fires off to an asynchronous call to Algolia, and then they return a promise saying, hey, if it worked or not, and usually it works because this is two high-end servers communicating to each other. Google to Algolia are both highly available networks. And so they're going to probably talk to each other just as good as if they were on the same system. So I'm virtually always going to get a success here. And so then I just console log out that the delete was successful, and then I show that object. So I can do a delete real quick where, and I can actually show you how kind of slow this is. This took forever. So when I was working on this and trying to figure all this stuff out, I was debugging with console.logs to here, and you'll see that it takes a while to update. Not too long, but so if I go into here and say I add a new client, and we'll just go over to Algolia. Actually, I'll name it client last name 7, and that was a whole bunch of updates. That there's my cloud store. So they're just coming through now. They're starting to come through. So we can look at what it was. Here's the add to Algolia, and it was the client 7. So that was the last update. So it's actually going faster today. It was usually about a 10-second wait before. So now I'll just you can see I'll go into that client 7, and I will delete it. I'll confirm my delete. Now that's going to delete it from the Firestore, and then Firestore is going to fire off a cloud function. So I'll hit confirm the delete. I'll go to my database over here, and then remember the last one was 746. It's 747 now, and we can just sit here and wait for that to come through. There it is. It just came through. This is actually about 5-10 seconds faster than it was the other day. And so there's all that stuff I output, right? Deleting from Algolia. Delete from Algolia successful, deleting from Algolia first, and then delete from Algolia successful. Delete from Algolia successful. There's the object. There's my success object that gives me the ID, and the task ID in Algolia as to when it happened and what took place. So that's Firebase firing off that function when I delete something from the database. And that's it. So that's all the code it takes to get the information from Firebase Firestore over to Algolia. And then it's a one-way functionality. There's no reason for Algolia to talk back to Firestore for as a return, because Algolia is just a copy of what's happening here in my database or what's happening here. So just anything that happens here, I just want to pass it over to Algolia and say, hey, there's been a change. So there is a possibility, though, if if one of those cloud functions does fail on an update, they will be out of sync. So I'm probably going to end up writing some kind of functionality to once a month go and just delete everything in Algolia and pass over, do a complete copy of the database over to Algolia. I don't know. We'll see. It depends if the information starts to get really out of sync. It shouldn't. Again, they're two high-end servers talking to each other, so it should work. I would say 99.9% of the time. And then anything else where if it does fail, if somebody goes back and updates that object, it's going to get written to again, which will then pass it over again. So I haven't had too much experience with it yet. Again, I'm just starting to plug all these things together. So anyway, Terry Caliendo, Dedicated Managers. That was another 28-minute, wow, long discussion. No wonder I'm losing my voice and my throat's starting to hurt. But hopefully it was helpful to understand how that works and how the cloud function works. Again, I don't have this code in a repository yet. I'll come back and update the description, but feel free if I forget to add a comment, and then I'll hopefully remember in the future. So Terry Caliendo, Dedicated Managers, signing off. 28 minutes, 44 seconds. Pretty amazing. We could have watched an entire episode of The Office with my wife, but instead sitting here talking to a computer screen. So take care. Have a great day. Happy coding.